Hi, my name is Danielle Carey. I am the clinical manager of our Carey office, a speech-language pathologist, and an orofacial myologist. Today, we are going to talk about some of the red flags you might see with feeding when there's an orofacial myofunctional disorder. So, we've talked about this before, but a good thing to circle back to is what is an orofacial myofunctional disorder. So that's any time when your tongue is not in appropriate rest posture or you're not using appropriate swallow patterns or muscle patterns for speech. And this happens a lot. And people ask why? Why is this so common? Why do so many kids have these difficulties and adults? And the answer is really our culture. As time has gone on, we have created softer and softer foods for babies. We've prolonged how long they are going to be accepting purees and delayed the amount of time that they're going to be using their jaw. And actually chewing is really good for jaw development. And not doing that, we start to develop some of these things. So one of the first things I'm going to tell you that I almost always think myofunctional disorder is picky eating. And I know that sounds silly. And sometimes picky eating is just a sensory difference. They don't want to touch a certain texture. They don't want to get their hands messy or get juice on them. And that can totally be 100% real. And their major and only problem with feeding. But what I find a lot of the time is when there's picky eating, whether it came from the myofunctional disorder or whether it came from the sensory disorder, there's almost always a myo or oral motor component to it, meaning that they're not using their mouth the way that they should be, and it makes it more difficult to eat these harder foods. So if you think about chewing on a goldfish versus chewing on a carrot stick, it's going to be a lot easier to chew on a goldfish. Even if you dip that carrot stick into a ranch sauce where it's more flavorful, it's still a harder breakdown than what the goldfish would be. So picky eating is definitely something that is always a red flag for me. If your child refuses meats and that's not something that's within your culture or your family values, especially if they take like chicken nuggets and deli meat and hot dogs, but maybe they don't take any cooked meats, like no hamburgers, no pork, no, anything that's going to take more breakdown. That's going to be a red flag for me that they're not using their masseter muscle, this muscle right here. If you watch, when I squeeze together, it's going to pop. If that doesn't happen, then we're not using that masseter muscle, and it's going to be much more difficult to break down. Some kids with myo disorders don't want to have any meats. Other kids don't want any fruits or vegetables. And what that comes down to is our fruits and vegetables are much more fibrous, and they take more of a grinding motion of our teeth to break down those fibers and make sure that they're easy for us to swallow. So when those things are awry, I don't always say, oh, that person definitely has a myofunctional disorder, but it's on my radar, and I'm going to be screening and looking for other things that might be going on. Something else that is a good indicator of myofunctional disorder is messy eating. So sometimes when someone's coming in and parents already suspect a tongue tie and I ask feeding questions, they're like, nope, everything's great. They eat everything, no feeding concerns. But then when they come in, I find out, oh, well, maybe they have one fruit and maybe they eat meats, but all the meats are crock pot meats and chicken nuggets and deli meat. And then I'm thinking, well, is this really okay? Is this really good, or is it working for this family? And that's totally fine. We don't have to work on something if it's not one of your goals, but it's a little bit of information for us to receive and think, I wonder, is there something else going on here? Another thing that could be a red flag for a myofunctional disorder is chipmunking the food. You're chewing, and then all of a sudden your toddler or your older kid has a cheek full of food, and they are never bringing it together into one cohesive unit and swallowing it down like we want to see. Another indicator could be open mouth chewing. So maybe you say there's no problems, but when I look at your child when they do their trial, they're chewing like that. That's not socially acceptable after a certain age, especially. Let me finish chewing this. So I look for open mouth chewing. Munch chewing is when we have a quick up and down motion, and it's very typical in babies. But what we want to see is as we advance their diet, that munch chew moves more and more closer to an adult rotary chew. Now, if you see that when your kid's eating their goldfish or their veggie sticks, they're putting fingers in their mouth like this, that's telling us they don't have the tongue function to bite and use their tongue to move it over to their lateral chew surface. So anytime I'm seeing lots of hands go in the mouth, I'm wondering, what is your tongue doing and why is it not functioning the way that it should? Chewing puree. So say you give them applesauce or yogurt or some baby food and they're chewing it before they swallow it. That can be an indication that they have difficulty collecting that bolus together and then pushing it from the front to the back of their mouth. So I'm going to be watching and seeing what their muscle patterns are doing. And then the final one that I can think of just right off the top before we go through some examples are multiple swallows. So say your kid maybe put in 5 goldfish and they're chewing and chewing, they swallow a little bit, and they're chewing, they swallow a little bit, and they're chewing, they swallow a little bit. That's not how we were made to chew and eat. Normally we put in an appropriate bite size, we chew, we collect all of that food up into our mouth, and then we swallow. And that is how we do it. So what I'm going to do next is a couple examples. And if you will hang tight for me for 1 second, I'm going to get my mouth model as well. Okay, so we've got our mighty mouth, we've got our cup. One of the first things that's important to know is how we should be swallowing. So when we go into a swallow, our tongue is going to dip down, the liquid's going to sit in the middle of the tongue. Then it's going to, in a split second, come to the spot where that bump is behind your teeth. You're going to get feeling here, and then you're going to have what's called a peristaltic wave motion. What that means is that your tongue is going to make a wave motion back and push the food back, kind of like a seal. So your tongue is sealing the vacuum, and then the motion is pushing it down your throat. If you are swallowing correctly, you should be able to do this magic trick, and I teach it to a lot of my kids in the eval to kind of get a sense of how they're swallowing liquid. You're going to take a little sip of water, let it sit on your tongue, smile, and swallow. If water comes out of the front, you are not using your tongue appropriately to swallow that water. So everybody, if you have a second, grab a cup of water, let's do it together. I tried to kind of over-exaggerate that swallow so you guys could see that I didn't swallow before I leaned over. I swallowed afterwards, and I'm using my tongue to seal that off. Another thing I want to show you is what it looks like if you're munching. It's very hard to break down food when you're just using an up and down motion. We really need to use that grinding motion to break the food completely down. For our younger friends, like 7 months to 18 months, sometimes you'll see this. And what they're doing is they're trying to break it down by mashing their tongue into their palate rather than moving the solid food over to the lateral chew surface, bringing it back together in a bolus and then swallowing it down. The final thing I want to model for you today is bilateral chewing into a bolus. And a bolus, for our sense, is just a ball of food. So we want to chew this carrot up, that's what I have, and I want to bring it together in one ball before I swallow. Looks like this. Some of my kids really do not like the part of showing me, but what I should see is one ball, one swallow to get it all down. Sometimes if they take too big of a bite and it's 2 swallows, that's totally expected. But as long as we're picking appropriate bite size, we should be able to chew, break down, and swallow all in one. So this is just a little screener you can do on your own children, on yourself. Am I swallowing correctly? If you're not, if you have concerns, feel free to reach out to Emerge. We're happy to help. We're happy to do a screening. We're happy to do an eval and see if you might benefit from services. Thank you so much for joining us and have a great week.